Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. The air was still that morning, so still it felt unnatural. The black spruce stood in stiff rows like sentinels beneath a bruised Quebec sky, and the only sounds were the soft crunch of boots on frozen moss and the din of a diesel generator near the radar station. Sidney Smith, just 26 years old, zipped his coat up to his chin and stepped out into the northern wilderness. He was alone, as he usually was. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. The work was simple in theory. Inspect the panels, check the relays, record the readings, and make repairs if needed. It was part of Canada's Cold War defense network, the Mid-Canada Line, a string of radar installations designed to guard the vast northern frontier. Schefferville, Quebec, where Sidney was stationed, sat on the edge of known country. Beyond the town stretched thousands of square miles of taiga and tundra. A land where caribou wandered, wolves howled, and black bears moved silently through underbrush that swallowed sound. The area surrounding Schefferville in 1964 was rugged, cold, and deeply forested. Vegetation consisted mostly of stunted black spruce, tamarack, and dwarf birch, growing in thin soil over rock and permafrost. The forest floor was a mix of moss, reindeer lichen, and tangled underbrush, ideal conditions for animals to remain hidden until they were very close. The wildlife was abundant. Moose and woodland caribou roamed the taiga, and beavers and river otters worked the slow-flowing streams. Predators included wolves and lynx, but the most likely and dangerous encounter for a lone man in this environment was the American black bear. Though black bears are generally considered more timid than their grizzly counterparts, they are capable of sudden, violent aggression, particularly when food is scarce or when a bear is surprised in close quarters. While fatal black bear attacks are rare, they are far from unheard of, especially in isolated areas where bears have limited exposure to people and no reason to fear them. Sidney Smith weighed in at a wiry 135 pounds. He was from the other side of Canada, near the city of Vancouver. The government hired men like him for their toughness, independence, and problem-solving skills. He had everything he needed to do the job: tools, gear, a place to stay with his own cook, and a hunting knife sheathed at his belt. That knife was standard, used for cutting rope, slicing wire, and opening crates, but today it would be all he had. Smith was transported by helicopter into the site on Thursday, September 17, 1964. He'd arrived just in time for dinner and only had the station cook as company. Smith waited for dinner for some time and decided he would go for a walk before eating. He was only a few hundred yards from the station, near a survival hut, when the bear appeared. Not 20 feet away, stepping from the brush as silently as fog, a black bear, and not a small one, at about 250 pounds. Maybe it was hungry, maybe it had been following him for a while, or maybe it was simply startled. No one can say. What we do know is this: the bear charged. Sidney reached for his knife. The gun, if he'd had one, wasn't there. Bear spray? Not invented yet. The knife was all he had. After dinner was ready, Smith had not returned from his walk, and the cook grew concerned. He reached out to Douglas Beaver, the superintendent of the company. Beaver brought 3 men with him by helicopter the morning of Friday, September 18th. They were not certain if Smith had become lost, and likely thought they would find him in a matter of a few hours. Given they had no idea what happened to Smith, they set out for the radar site, unarmed. As the helicopter carrying the superintendent began to land, a black bear emerged from the bushes near the radar station. The men disembarked the helicopter and were immediately pursued by the black bear. It chased them into the building and peered through the window, smearing blood on the glass. Now held captive at the radar station, the realization of what had happened to Smith set in, as well the danger they were now in. They radioed for help, and a man was soon on his way from Schefferville with a rifle. The armed man dispatched the angry bear with a single shot from his rifle. With the threat of the bear now removed, the search for Smith resumed. Near the survival hut, they located a blood trail in the 2 inches of snow. Following the blood trail, they discovered Smith's knife, covered in blood and lying along the trail. A short distance away, Smith's lifeless body was discovered, ending all hope of his survival. Based on the physical evidence recovered at the scene and details from a subsequent investigation, it appears the bear either stalked or surprised him. There were signs that Smith attempted to defend himself, as cuts were later found on the bear's face and head, suggesting he wounded the animal in the process. The searchers did not report the presence of a cached animal carcass and did not report the presence of cubs in the area. Speaking of cubs, our Cub Tier membership on Patreon, linked below, will give you ad-free early access to notes, pictures, and episodes. The $3 per month will go a long way in helping me continue to produce educational and entertaining content like this. The attack on Sidney Smith is one of the earliest documented black bear fatalities linked to modern industrial work in Canada. Unlike hikers or campers, Smith was not recreating. He was on the job, maintaining infrastructure vital to Cold War national defense. What makes the case stand out is its context, an experienced, capable man doing his job in a modern world that had pushed just a little too far into ancient wilderness. Quebec supported an estimated black bear population in the 60s of over 75,000 bears over its 595,391 square miles. This is a bear density of 1 black bear for every 8 miles, which is a moderate to high density. Smith's attack was believed to be a predatory attack, which have a higher rate of occurrence in remote regions. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Was this bear acting unusually, or did Sidney step into its path at the worst possible time? Would modern safety protocols, such as working in teams, carrying bear spray, or using motion-activated alarms, have changed the outcome? What led the bear to attack Sidney Smith? Was it predation, starvation, or surprise? I will gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. In the early 1800s, long before Hollywood and highways, California was a raw, sun-baked wilderness of chaparral, scrub oak, and grassland. It was a land of dry summers, wet winters, and an abundance of wildlife. Massive tule elk roamed the plains. Mule deer browsed the hillsides. And lurking among them, like phantoms, were the California grizzly bears, some of the largest and most aggressive bears ever known in North America. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Predators of the time included cougars, coyotes, and gray wolves, but nothing inspired awe or fear like the grizzly. Taller than a man at the shoulder and often weighing over 1,000 pounds, California grizzlies were as plentiful as they were dangerous. Spanish settlers who brought livestock, religion, and fiesta traditions with them quickly found themselves in direct competition with these apex predators. Among the most bizarre and brutal spectacles ever devised during this colonial period was the staged bear and bullfight, a public blood sport intended to demonstrate the power of beasts and the courage of man. It wasn't enough to watch. The most respected members of the community were the Lazadoras, skilled horsemen and ropers who would ride into the wilderness and capture a grizzly bear alive, armed only with rawhide lassos and reckless resolve. It was dangerous, theatrical, and as the following stories will show, often tragically foolish. In the spring of 1850, 2 ranch hands, Jim Boggs and John Richards, worked cattle in the rolling hills of Sonoma County, California. The gold rush had just exploded. The cities were swelling. But out here, in the oak-studded plains between the Russian River and the Mayacamas Range, the land still belonged to the bears. Richards, a younger man and something of a bragger, had become enamored with tales of the Lazadoras. He boasted often about his skills with a lariat and claimed he could rope any animal that walked the earth. Boggs, older and more experienced, had little interest in such antics, but Richards was insistent. When he heard that a large grizzly had been sighted just beyond the ridgeline above their grazing land, he saw it not as a warning, but as an opportunity. Richard saddled up early, lariat coiled tightly at his side, and rode out with Boggs, reluctantly following. They found the bear in a clearing near the edge of a thicket, browsing among the manzanita bushes. It was a mature male, enormous even by California standards, with a silver-dusted back and thick ruff of muscle around its neck. Richards didn't wait. With practiced ease, he spun his lariat in wide loops overhead and rode down the slope toward the animal. Boggs, sensing disaster, shouted a warning, but it was too late. The rope sailed through the air and dropped neatly around the bear's midsection, settling just behind the massive shoulders. The horse braced, the rope went taut, and the bear sat down. Rather than panic or flee, the grizzly calmly planted its haunches and began pulling, hand over paw, dragging the horse and Richards toward it, like a reeling fisherman. Boggs, in disbelief, watched the situation deteriorate. To make matters worse, the lariat was tied fast to the saddle horn. When the bear gave a powerful jerk, the terrified horse kicked free of the saddle and bolted, leaving Richards on foot, still connected to the now enraged bear. The grizzly rose to its full height and charged. Richards had no time to draw a weapon. The bear struck with the force of a freight train, claws flashing. It knocked Richards to the ground and began mauling him with furious precision, jaws clamping down on limbs, claws raking through flesh. The screams were brief, then came the silence. Boggs, realizing his partner was dying, or already dead, acted on instinct. He advanced, pistol drawn, and placed the barrel against the side of the bear's head. He fired once. The bear roared and released Richards, turning its fury on this new threat. Boggs fired again. The grizzly faltered, then surged forward in a final fury. It tackled Boggs, slamming him to the ground and tearing into his legs, his arms, his chest. The pistol clattered into the dirt. Boggs, in a final act of desperation, went limp, feigning death, and it worked. The bear stood over him, breathing heavily, then slowly turned and began to walk away. But Boggs, mangled and barely conscious, made the mistake of lifting his head to look. The grizzly saw the movement. It turned and it came back. The second mauling was worse than the first. When the bear finally left, Jim Boggs was barely alive. But somehow, against all odds, he would live. A few years earlier, another man nearly met a similar fate. This one was no cowboy, but a young naval officer who had traveled west to California for the express purpose of roping a grizzly bear. The account appears in the 1866 book Border Reminiscences by R.B. Marcy, a U.S. Army officer and Western explorer. The officer trained diligently, practicing with both rope and horse until he felt confident in his abilities. Then he hired a local guide and set off into the California mountains in search of a suitable bear. They found one soon enough, a giant male grizzly with a broad back and the air of deep menace. Undeterred, the young officer approached at a gallop, his lasso spinning overhead. Just as he neared, the bear stopped, turned, and stood upright. The rope dropped over the bear's neck, and the officer jerked it tight. Rather than fall, the bear sat down like a stone pillar. Then it began pulling, paw over paw. The bear hauled in the horse and the rider, hand-lining them with methodical strength. The officer panicked and called out for help. His guide, recognizing the severity of the situation, spurred forward and sliced through the rope with his knife. The horse, relieved of its burden, fled at full speed, taking the shaken officer with it. The guide later offered to help him find a smaller, more manageable bear. The officer reportedly replied that he would find a new hobby instead. John Richards survived the 1850 Sonoma County mauling, but suffered crippling injuries to his arm and leg. He walked with difficulty for the rest of his life. Jim Boggs, though also badly mauled, made a more complete recovery. According to Reminiscences of a Ranger by Horace Bell, Neither man ever attempted another bear roping. As for the naval officer, he escaped with his life and his limbs intact, thanks to a quick-witted guide and a lucky cut of the rope. His tale became one of many cautionary lessons told and retold by Western pioneers and military men alike. Imagine the fight the cowboys would have had if they'd roped an angry sow protecting her cubs. Speaking of cubs, our Cub Tier membership on Patreon, linked below, will give you ad-free early access to photos, notes, and episodes. And the $3 per month goes a long way in helping me continue to produce educational and entertaining content like this. Grizzly populations in California in the 1800s have been estimated to be around 10,000 bears, but today they're extinct in the state. They were legendary for their size, with reports of bears weighing in at 1,200 pounds or more. Recent discussions regarding reintroducing the bears to their former habitat have rattled some and excited others. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Why did this dangerous tradition ever take root in the first place? Was it cultural pride, spectacle, or simply a failure to understand the consequences of taming wild predators? Were the men of that time tougher than men of today, or did they have no other choice? Should this historical legacy be more widely taught, not to glorify the past, but to understand the cost of entertainment at nature's expense? The stories of Jim Boggs, John Richards, and the naval officer remind us that there are limits to human control over wild nature. The California grizzly, now gone from our mountains, once taught painful lessons to those who underestimated it. I'll gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. The dark forests of Maine conceal many things in their shadows. Apart from being the setting for several books by horror writer Stephen King, Maine is also the location for a very real and tragic horror story. But the villain wasn't a maniac or a supernatural power, but a big black bear with a seething hatred for people. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. In the autumn of 1916, the wilderness of northern Maine was a patchwork of pine forests, spruce thickets, and crisp tannin-dark streams flowing cold from the Appalachian highlands. Long before modern campgrounds, this rugged terrain offered isolation, game, and silence, ideal for the dedicated deer hunter. Hunters from the northeastern states routinely traveled to these woods, pitching tents far from civilization, staking out favorite ridges, and listening to the occasional echo of rifle shots in the distance. It was a place that belonged more to the moose and the black bear than to man. That fall, a hunter named Frederick Evans Wilson established a small camp deep in the woods, not far from two other groups of outdoorsmen. What began as a peaceful retreat quickly turned into one of the most chilling bear encounters ever recorded in Maine's backcountry, one that ended with a death, a night-long siege, and a lone survivor. Frederick Evans Wilson, likely in his 40s or 50s at the time, was a practical man. He set up camp within a mile or two of other hunting parties, a reasonable distance for solitude, yet close enough that the men might share news or cross paths while trekking game. In this era, Maine's north woods were largely undeveloped, accessed by logging roads, horseback or mule, and the men who entered them were usually well acquainted with both hardship and self-reliance. Frederick's tent was modest, canvas shelter staked among fir trees near a cold water stream. He carried the usual equipment, rifle, field knife, hatchet, a few utensils, and perhaps a tin bucket or two. He hunted deer by day and cooked game over open flame by night. One evening while preparing supper, Frederick heard 2 gunshots ring out in the distance. He assumed with little concern that one of the other camps had spotted game or was dispatching a wounded animal. He returned to his meal. He didn't yet know that something was hunting the hunters. At first light the following morning, a man named Vic, one of the neighboring hunters, stumbled breathlessly into Frederick's camp. His face was pale and drawn, his voice cracking with alarm. He explained that he'd discovered a horrific scene at the other tent site. A fellow hunter had been dragged from his sleeping bag during the night and killed by a bear. The predator had already consumed a portion of the man's body before disappearing into the trees. Worse yet, Vic reported that the same bear had attempted to enter his own tent later that night. He had fired 2 warning shots, which startled the animal enough to turn it back, at least temporarily. Realizing the danger he was in, Vic had packed his mule and left at daybreak, riding out to alert authorities. Before leaving, he issued a grim warning to Frederick. "Be careful, that bear is still out there." Frederick remained cautious. He knew black bears generally avoided humans, but this one had killed and fed on a man and returned for more. He likely moved his supplies, kept his rifle closer, and kept one ear to the forest. Some days later, as dusk gathered in the hollows, Frederick walked down to the stream to collect some water. The forest was quiet. Cold mist clung to the rocks. On his return, he stopped dead in his tracks. A large black bear was entering his tent. Frederick's rifle, his only means of defense, was leaning against the outside wall of the canvas. The bear slipped inside before he could reach it. Trapped between the safety of distance and the danger of action, Frederick made the only choice he could. He backed away and hid himself behind a cluster of trees. From there he watched. The bear rooted through the tent like a burglar, tossing gear, sniffing packs, pawing food wrappers. Frederick feared not only for his life, but for the possibility that this was the same bear that had already killed a man. He could not risk confronting it, nor could he retrieve his weapon without exposing himself. Instead, he emptied the water from his tin bucket and struck the metal with a large stone. The ringing sound pierced the dark and echoed across the hillsides. The bear stopped. It backed out of the tent and stared into the trees, listening, but it did not leave. Instead, the bear returned to the tent and resumed its destructive exploration. All night, Frederick crouched silently beneath the branches, cold and motionless. From within the canvas, he heard banging, tearing, and the snuffling breath of the great animal. It rooted through his rations and gear, the tent now its den. Sheltering in the bushes, Frederick found no rest all night. At first light, the bear finally exited the tent. It stood momentarily in the clearing, satisfied with its night of disruption, and began to amble away through the undergrowth. Now was Frederick's only chance. Moving quickly, but carefully, he retrieved his rifle from where it leaned against the tent wall, took aim, and fired. The bullet found its mark. The bear collapsed in the brush, not far from the tent, and the ordeal was over. Frederick Evans Wilson survived his encounter with the bear. The unnamed hunter in the neighboring tent was not so lucky, killed in his sleep and partially consumed, his body discovered only hours after the attack. Vic, the second camper, managed to escape before becoming the next victim, but Frederick came within moments of joining them. There is no record of whether the bear's body was examined for age, weight, or health, but the behavior it exhibited fits the rare documented pattern of food-conditioned or predatory black bears. The bear had returned to its scene of its previous kill, then escalated its boldness by entering tents in search of food. In many historical bear attacks, death is swift. What made this case especially terrifying was the prolonged standoff, a night of helpless silence as a bear took control of a man's only shelter in the wilderness. Fortunately, cubs were not accompanying the bear, or it may have been even more aggressive. Speaking of cubs, our Cub Tier membership on Patreon linked below will give you ad-free early access to photos, notes, and episodes. And the $3 per month goes a long way in helping me continue to produce educational and entertaining content like this. Today, Maine hosts around 30,000 black bears, which average in weight between 250 and 400 pounds as adults. From 1900 to 2020, there have been 67 fatal black bear attacks reported in the United States. The bear attack victim on Frederick Wilson's hunting trip is the only recorded fatality of a human in the state of Maine due to bears. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think the bear found Frederick's tent by following Vic to Frederick's campsite? Was the bear drawn to the tents for the scent of the food stored there, or was it seeking out human prey? Could this have been just one of many undocumented predatory encounters? The bear that stalked the Maine wilderness in 1916 serves as a reminder that even the typical shy black bear can become a deadly predator. Frederick Evans Wilson lived to tell the tale, but his story remains a chilling caution for anyone who dares to sleep in the wilderness without respecting the rules of bear country. I'll gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.